Okay. Yeah. So yeah, like I was talking to Unandi the time I was in Joburg, and I was saying, you know what, we are always talking, but we don't do practical things. So I think it's high time now to introduce and to mix these traditional instruments. And also, my grandfather was a traditional healer. So you know, I for me, it's my life. Yeah, that's all I can say.
All right. Let me try and answer your questions, Vui. I would say the most known indigenous instruments, as Lungi has said, it's the marimba, and then you get the drums, and then you get mostly people don't know about indigenous instruments from South Africa. They're not well marketed or out there. So in the recent years, there's been a movement, and I mean, people like Lungi and Bradizu, they've been doing this since. But I have noticed that there is a new wave of young people like us who want to put these instruments to the fore. By that, I mean South African instruments like your uadi. You find people now playing umkhube like on the mainstream. And there's many instruments. And what's nice about indigenous instruments is that it's instruments that people who play them can make them by themselves. You know, you go out to the bush to cut the tree and make your own umkhube or uadi. That's the beauty of these indigenous instruments, is that we can also mass produce them, you know, because the materials that we use to make them, they come from areas that we live in, you know. And I think that the role of those instruments is humongous in our communities. One, not only it teaches the young kids to be able to make instruments by themselves, you know, they will be able to actually learn from the people who are older than them, who can tell them the stories behind the songs or behind how they make these instruments. For me, that's how I view the importance of the indigenous musical instruments in our communities. And then you find instruments like the drum. You know, in all our communities in Africa, we have drums, you know, and each of those, they have a specific role in a community. There is a specific function that they perform. You know, that's the other thing about the indigenous instruments, is that it's not only just for the entertainment or so that we can have like instruments. There is a reason why there's a specific drum that's being played when a young girl goes through an initiation process. You know, that specific instrument speaks, because the other thing about indigenous instruments, that we don't realize, is that they speak to us, they speak to our souls. You know, so you can't speak a language that is not appropriate for that specific function or ritual that is happening. And then socially, how does the music keep it good socially? I think one of the things is that in indigenous peoples in Africa, music is like a repository of ecological knowledge, if I may put it like that. It's where we go back to actually find out about stuff that was happening before us. We go back to music, because everything that we want about our society is embedded in our indigenous music. So I think for me, that's how the indigenous music is functional in the society.
Thank you. I definitely want us to talk about the drums specifically a little bit more, but just to comment on what you've both shared on the different kinds of indigenous instruments and, you know, the processes of these instruments. I think for me, again, and I will speak from the perspective that I have, which is obviously as a traditional healer. One of the things that is so incredible and amazing for me about, so I've been obsessed for years with like the drum. What is the South African drum? And then I got initiated, and there was a particular drum and there was a particular drum beat. But one of the things that was really interesting for me is that the men who make the drums, right, are almost also called to make the drums. So they also have, it's like there are the people who play the drums, there are the people who make the drums, there are people who go and source the wood for the drums. So there's a whole like value chain of people and of knowledge that exists from where the material of the instrument comes from to that moment where it's in a ritual, in action and in participation with other people. There's a whole value chain of people and of knowledge that exists. And I think that's something that maybe we don't talk about, but that definitely speaks to this idea of Indigenous knowledge systems, right? Because it's not only about the music, but it's also about the materials. It's also about, so for instance, in our kind of like, tradition of healing, there would be a very particular man in a particular village. So in Mpumalanga, for instance, who would know that there's a particular tree, right, that is good for making these drums. And then he would know that the tree is best to cut down at this kind of time. And then perhaps there would be some other observations before or after he's cut down this tree. There would be some meditations that he would undergo before he starts carving the drum. So there's all these other things that happen, you know, the cow skins that they use to make the base of the drum, and, you know, the part that we hit. There's a whole knowledge and information around how to get it to be a particular kind of texture and all of those kinds of things. And for me, I think those are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about when we are talking about Indigenous knowledge systems, because I think it can exist in a very like isolated space, which is that space of participation and that space where the music is being made. But there are so many things that take place before it, you know, things that are equally important. And then the other thing that I love that you said, Nandi, was around, I forgot, I lost my train of thought. There's something that you, yeah.
No, I just wanted to agree on something with you just said, which I think we as this young generation need to step up on it. It seems like people don't understand that the Indigenous knowledge system, it's not just something that's there. There is a structure to everything that happens in that space, you know.
100%.
And now because maybe it's not structured or in a way where Western cultures do things, people tend to think that it's not that important. But I know, for example, that the process of childbirth in an African situation it's not just a child is there. You know, there is a process, there is a system that goes in there, and which is something that is embedded in us through our ancestors. They developed these things. But because our history is passed orally, so people may think that when we do ceremonies or when something is happening which is Indigenous, people just wake up and decide to do this. But there is a whole system behind the whole thing. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah. So what I wanted to comment on is around the knowledge. So you were talking about how the songs themselves are not just like feel good and we're having a good time, but they actually are passing knowledge. The songs themselves are portals and sites of knowledge, you know. And again, going back to the tradition that I've been initiated in. So when you come as initiate, there are particular songs that you sing, right? That say, this person has just arrived and is a young initiate. At a particular, let's say the second or the third stage of your journey as an initiate, there would be very particular songs that you would sing. Once you graduate, there's also very particular songs that you sing. So even the songs themselves denote where a person is in their journey. And I would imagine even in other like communities, the same, you know, so even how we have very specific songs for birthdays, or we have very specific songs for funerals, or very specific songs for young boys when they come back, or young girls when they come back. So the songs themselves are sites of knowledge, and the songs themselves are that moment, you know, of sharing, of knowledge sharing and knowledge keeping. So as much as it's also important for us to learn how to make the instruments and how to play these instruments, it's so important for us to remember these songs, because like you say, our history and our legacy is one of like oratory, right? So everything that we do, and a lot of the way that knowledge is transformed in, I guess, the African context, but particularly in Southern Africa, is through the oral, you know. So I was speaking on another panel discussion where we were talking about the same thing, Indigenous knowledge system. And I was saying that it's not that we haven't been writing. You know, the oldest university in the world is on African soil. So it's not that text is a new thing to African people, but there is also this other form of knowledge transferring that has been undermined because we hold this other form of knowledge to higher esteem. The thing that is happening now with the Khoi and the San, where that language is almost extinct, you know, people have to actively work to make sure that it doesn't die out, is because we're taking for granted the ways that our knowledge has always been transferred, you know. So I think the role of music and the role of songs particularly is so much more than what I think young people, I think myself included, you know, until I came to this place of understanding that the songs are about history. The songs tell us where we come from. The songs tell us about where we're still going. They tell us about where we are currently, you know, and these are ancient songs, you know, which is also quite comforting to know that there's really nothing new under the sun, and that we are in a continuum, and we're in a line of things that have long been happening, you know. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on that when you were talking about the role of the music and the song, and just to expand on that a little bit more, you know. But I don't know, I think I want us to talk about the drum. So my question and my thing is, what is the Southern African drum? Like, what is our drum? Because everywhere I go, people are playing the djembe drum in South Africa. And I'm just like, that's not our drum, you know. And then we have I guess it's like the drum that is quite popular in KZN, that is like on the side, which for me is quite reminiscent of like colonial influence and marching bands, you know. So then I'm like, that's not our drum. So the drum that we use, the one that I was telling you guys about earlier on, is a wooden base, and then they use the cow skin on top, you know. And that drum is not as tall and as anchored as the djembe drum, which seems to be very popular. And I would love to hear from you guys if you know, because I'm on a quest. I'm trying to find, you know, and people have spoken about the Nguni drum, which is like this ancient drum that nobody really knows where it is. There were claims that it was in Venda amongst the Lembe people. So, you know, there's been many claims around the original drum and our drum, and I'm interested to find out your understandings of the different kinds of drums that have shaped our South African sound, and what you think is the original drum.
Lungi, you want to go first?
You know, igubu, we call it in Xhosa, we call it igubu. And also, if we can check this instrument at the drum, mbira, wadi, all this, for my understanding, when I see these instruments, the Western instruments, when I check, for example, I just want to go out of about talking about the drum a little bit. When you check when I check Mbira for my understanding, and then when I see piano, it's like our Mbira is our African sound piano. It comes from us, you know. And also you go back to Uadi. And then the kids of today, when they see Uadi, they say, this is a guitar. And then if you check Uadi, and then you check the guitar, and you can see that Uadi, it's been there for many years. And you know, igubu, I grew up in a family of, as I said, my late grandfather was a traditional healer. So igubu for me, it's a medicine of our African people, you know. And also, I don't like to separate the drums, you know. Say djembe comes from Africa, yes, but we South African, we tend to live our original drums, like for instance, the drum you were talking about. So it's been there for many years. So for me, Igubu, it's a traditional medicine, and also the traditional healers, they can't do anything without a drum. Or also in when in other rural areas, you'll find out when they bury someone, they use drums like at home, and also in when the boys are going to a school. So I can't say drum is like this. Drum is it means different things. But for me, I can say drum is just a healer. It heals you. It tells you if you want to sing, because here at home I've got drums. If I want to compose a song, I don't just go to Uhati, or I just start with the drum because it gives me the rhythm. And also the drums, you'll find there are kinds of different drums that they have tones, So everything that I do, if I want to compose a song, I start with the drum. So that's why I'm saying a drum is a big thing. It just heals you. It just, I don't know, what can I say? But yeah.
Wow. That's great. Well, to answer your question, I would say in Southern Africa, in Africa general, every community has its own type of special drum. And I think that the way that we used to construct drums was according to where I come from. If, say, for example, we don't have wood, we would find something else to make a drum with, out of what we can find in our environment. Like, for example, the original Xhosa drum was called ingqongqo. It's a cow skin that would be stretched around by maybe 5 or 6 women. And then they would hold it with one hand, and then with one hand, they would have a stick to beat on the skin. That was the original drum of the Xhosa people. It was called ingqongqo. So you see, it's now people using their environmental materials to make a drum for themselves. And then you go to places like Venda. In Venda, you find an ensemble of drums, like 4 to 5 drums, where you get the bigger drum, which is called ngoma. You find the smaller drum called murungwa. And that drum called murungwa, you could find it in Pedi people as well, and in Tswana people and Sotho, because they almost come to from the same areas, And with all of these sets of drums, most of them, as you were saying, are made by men, but they're played by women. Funny thing, right? And there's different types of drums. The Khoi people, they have their own set of drum that there's a book that maybe I would like to suggest to you, Vui, to get. Yes, it's called The Musical Instruments of the Native Races of South Africa by Percival Kebi. He's the guy who recorded ancient instruments, and then they took pictures. So we always go to reference that book when we want to see how our original instruments look like. And I think you would find it very interesting. But to answer you, the drum is like a sacred instrument in Africa. Just to move away from South Africa, right? I know that we play the djembe and all that. In West Africa, there's a drum that they have that is called a slit drum. Now, that slit drum, the ancient stories tell us that it was the original cell phone. Like a long distance communication drum. That's what it's called in English, So it's a drum where you can play a pattern as if you are speaking, Now in that drum, you would play that part. People in the communities, they would play that drum. If, say, for example, there's danger coming in this village, they would, a designated person would play that drum and a certain pattern in that drum. And that pattern would be heard on the next village. And the person from that village who plays their own sacred drum will hear the pattern and understand what it means and play the same thing in a different language to the first one. And then that's how the communication would go from village to village. That's the power of the drum, you know. And as I said before, the drum, when you play the drum, as Lung was saying, it speaks to you, it tells you what to say, you know. So in South Africa, I think we have neglected our drums mostly. We only, when we talk about our traditional drum, we think about ikubu. And to also go back to your question, to your statement, Vuyi, you are right. Our original ikubu was made of a tree trunk that had been hollowed inside. So you would hollow that tree trunk and then you put in, on the sides, you put in the skins, whether it's a cow or goat cow. But now with the influence of the colonialists, when they came in, they introduced tin through the marching bands. And now that's when African people, through their creativity, they thought, oh, okay, now in order for us to be able to carry our drum, because if you're carrying a tree trunk and you're walking, it's gonna be heavy for you. You will either have to put it on the floor. So they use the tin so that they can be able to carry the drum. You are right, the tin, the drum that we know now is not our original drum.
Yeah, I see we've got 10 minutes. So I just want to find out, Jess, do you think we should continue or get off the call and then come back on? Is Jess still here?
Well, we could always send a fresh link if you want to have another 40 minutes to continue instead of trying to squeeze it into 10.
Yeah, I think maybe I think we can use the same link again. I think we can jump off and jump on again, no? How long have we been talking? Maybe we've been speaking for longer than we thought. It feels very sudden.
Yeah. So we've been talking for 30 minutes, but I can send through a fresh link, or we can just rejoin. I don't think we can rejoin from this link because it was from 11 to 11:40. So,
okay.
So maybe if there's like there's one question that you think can be answered in say 5 minutes, we can use this remaining 8 minutes here, and then and then I can send through a fresh link so we can continue.
Okay. I think let's use the rest of the time that we've got. The other thing that I wanted us to speak about was the Kwela and Bakanga influence on, I guess, where we are now as we understand South African jazz. Like I said, when I got into writing about South African jazz, it was just like amazing. I didn't know any other young people that were interested in it. I always thought it was this old highbrow kind of music. And then I started to hear like something quite familiar, you know, something that felt quite ancestral and that I could connect with, and particularly with Brazil, you know, Zimngawani, he was one of my first like influences of this. Is this jazz? Is this ancestral? Is this, you know? So I don't know if either of you can maybe like contribute to just how we've gotten to the place that we are. And I know, Lunsa, you've been working a lot with various musicians, so perhaps you can just talk to us a little bit about those influences of indigenous music, but also Kwela and Bakanga, and how that led to the jazz that we understand and we know today.
The Kwela and Bakanga, it's still African music, that's all I can say. And when I look at the late Zimngawani, you know, each and every, I call it, when I listen to him, for me, I always said, you know, for it was a calling, you know. There are lots of traditional healers here. And then you'll find out people, they tend to go to African music, and we call it jazz, but for me, I will call it indigenous, a sound, world music. So Kwela and Batanga, for me, it's a same thing as African music. You know, it's just that it differ in terms of the rhythm and the sound. Yeah.
Nandi?
Yeah. Wow. A small contribution.
I'm gonna have a load shedding now soon. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Sorry. All right, let me be quick. I would think that specifically speaking to people like Utatu Zimngawana, for me, those are the guys that wrote on the jazz, and then they flipped it, and then they said, we want to do our own thing. I'm going to put in traditional sounds in this.
Okay. I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk about, which is a bit sad because I was hoping Mutsumi would have been a part of this conversation, but was about like the serious business of music in Africa, right? And when I say serious business, you know, there's that fella quote where is a fellow Bob Marley who says music is not a plaything, it's a spiritual thing, you know?
Yes.
And I wanted to talk about musical lineages and how in South Africa, a lot of the people, indigenous people anyway, who participate as music makers, musicians, artists, creatives, a lot of them are being called to that profession, you know, and we know this and we see this in the sense that, you know, your grandfather or your mother or somebody else was also like in this occupation or vocation. And I mean, one of the families that I'm obsessed with is the Machene family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so clear, that thing of how they're all musicians and then they're all sort of like gifted or healers in one way. You know, there's Tlale Machene, there's Blondie Machene, there's the Machene sisters. And I was hoping Mutsumi would have contributed to this. But for me, that family is such a great example of this idea that like music is quite a serious thing and quite a spiritual thing in the country. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on just like the spirituality and maybe your experience as well, is like, how does the music feel for you, and how do you think you found yourself where you are?
Oh wow, that's very powerful, Vui. And I think you're right. Especially with the lineages thing, I've also been interested, but you will not go around Johannesburg without finding one Machene member in a band or something. And I think that it's a good thing when you have family members who are receptive to their gifts and culture. And I think that when you embrace that, it gives the younger ones a freedom to fly and be who they are. I think that's probably what has happened with that family, you know, and with most of the families that we see, that there is a gift that goes down the lineages. I wanna attribute that to the family members who are older in that family, who were able to be receptive to the cultures, you know, because most of us, we come from Christian families where you are told that's demonic, that's what, you can't do that, you can't do that. And then when we go on and try to find ourselves by ourselves without the guidance of the elders in our families, you know, and you would maybe find that some, like for example, when I went to study music at university, my father was not happy about that. And they told me that, yeah, you are going to be a musician, you're going to be drunk, you're going to do drugs, there's that negative connotation. But I think if I had grew up with a family that is acceptive and receptive to our cultures, things would have been different, even with my siblings, because in like you get families that get gifted people, but those people, their gifts, they try to suppress them because maybe they're not going to be welcome in the family. Yeah. And I think also with us as African, we are very spiritual people, you know. Before our encounter with the white people, we didn't know religion. We were operating on a spiritual level. And if you operate on a spiritual level, you don't get special people. Everybody's special. Everybody's got a gift, you know. and now musical gifts, they manifest in different ways. Like, for example, me, I study music, I can sing, but I believe that my calling is in teaching music, not necessarily be the person who's going to be on stage. And I feel more fulfilled when I impart my knowledge to the next person. And that's how I view my calling, that I'm called to be the teacher. So I think it's important that we realize that, and we go back to our systems of doing things, which is spiritual. I hear people saying, yeah, there's a lot of spiritual people lately. And I'm like, okay, what are we supposed to do? We're going back to who we are. We are claiming ourselves. We're confident about that, and we are not apologetic about being who we are, and if it's going to manifest in my child having these gifts that have been given, then that's what it's going to be. That's what our ancestors want us to give. And it's not just because you want to be on stage. Most of the people that I know who are gifted, it's not about fame for them. It's about the message that they get given so that they can heal their communities. Like, for example, that's how I know Tlale. Tlale is a drummer, but Tlale is a healer. His music, 100%. What he says in his music heals you, and now when you hear he's playing on the drum, it just solidifies everything. It puts together, and it makes sense when you understand what is going on.
Yeah. I love what you said about how religion is something that was introduced, and yet we were always spiritual people. And this is what I try to say to people in my practice as well, that spirituality is a way of life. It's not like a negotiation, a trade-off, I do this and I get that. It's about every crevice of your life, But the other thing that you also said, there was
only on Sunday.
It's like everything that you do is layered with this recognition of not just your own spirituality, but the spirituality of all things around you, which is why we can turn the trees into drums, which is why we can do all of these things. But the other thing that you said also was that no one is more gifted, no one is more special, and I never forget this. There's something that Nduduzo said when he said that in an African context, there are no participants in a ritual, or that there is no audience in a ritual. Everybody is a participant, So absolutely. The person who's on stage and the person who, I guess in a Western lens, you would view as an audience member, in our culture, in our perspective, those people are also participants to the ritual, because those people are the ones who back the person who's singing, that's how we work in our community, where it's a call and a response. The person who's estigini on stage or whatever will lead, and then the people in the audience will play the drums, they will clap their hands, they will back, so everybody is involved in that moment. And it's not this like voyeuristic kind of experience where it's just people experiencing something as opposed to participating in something, So that's also something that when you were saying that made me think of when Duduzo was saying that. And I think it's so important to drive that point home and to make people realize that this is not a performance, this is a ritual, and we are all participating in it, and the more aware we are and the more we lend our awareness to that fact, then just the more healing can take place, for everybody. So absolutely. I think that was really beautiful. Let me see. I think I had a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about. I think we did talk about the quest. Oh yes, and then you were talking about, I don't think we can talk about Indigenous knowledge systems and not talk about knowledge keepers and knowledge sharing. And when you speak about your calling being a teacher, I think that's also something that I'd like us to maybe just talk a little bit on why it's important to impart this knowledge, why it's important to make sure that younger generations are gaining access and are being given the information and the resources to participate in this thing that is seemingly so ancient, but obviously still quite important. So I just want to maybe get you to talk about your work as a teacher and just why that is important.
Oh, wow. Okay. It comes from the way I grew up. I grew up in the village. I'm a village girl. And in our village, like at night, we used to cook on the Rondavel side, outside. And there we would get stories at night from our Aunt Magaba. And that for me was how I actually got to know that, oh, the moon has a baby and the dog and the mother. Oh, certain things in Africa are done like this. And that is shared to me through stories and storytelling. And as I grew up, I found that I enjoy more to give what I know than to actually get, if I may put it like that, because one of the things that I enjoy is sitting with elderly people, because for me, that's where I get to get the most real and raw history about us, you know, because older people, they will tell it like it is, they won't sugarcoat anything. And for me, then, as I grew up, I was in Johannesburg scene, performing and doing all of those things. And it was just that for me. But I got involved into promoting African music. And I found that when you do African music to kids in the township, it becomes a very easy thing. Like, for example, I used to teach music theory. And the way that I teach music theory is from an approach that has an African perspective. And I found that for them, it becomes much easier to grasp when I'm talking about crotchets, when I'm talking about quavers, but I'm putting it in a way that they understand. And for me, it was fulfilling when I saw that kids could now be able to actually compose their own music, you know, using African instruments, but having that mind at the back of that says, okay, I know in music theory, I can mix this this beat and this beat and that beat to come up with this. And for me, that was the most fulfilling thing as a music teacher. And I specifically chose to teach African instruments. And that was one of the things that when I saw that no one else is doing it in Gauteng at that time when I started doing it, I felt like it's something that I need to actually focus on as my life mission. And as a result of that, we ended up starting a group. I have a group of kids in Soweto that I work with. We call it Ukubu, Nezinsimbi Zomculo Wesintu, where we teach all these indigenous instruments for free of charge to kids around the township in White City. We work from Maurice Isaacson Music School. So the aim for me, my dream was to have an indigenous African music orchestra, where you will find strings, your uhadi, and also in South Africa, our uhadi are different. We've got different types of these instruments. The Zulu people, they have umakweyane. The Xhosa people, they have uhadi, and the way they are made, they are different. And for me, I could see that we could have an orchestra of these instruments, including drums, including everything that you may find here. And we try to emulate that with that group in Soweto. But at the moment, we don't have all these instruments that we want. We will get there. But that was a manifestation for me that this thing is possible. It's possible to have our children learning our instruments in modern societies, like Soweto is a modern society. But those kids, we've taught them how to make uhadi using tins, because that's what we could find in our area. So you take a tin of the baby food and then or something, and you make that as a god. And then you make an instrument out of that. So they have done it, you know, and that for me, it makes me happy to know that the knowledge system that have been passed to us by people like Oma Dosini, who have taught us how to make these instruments, we're now passing it over to these young ones who maybe in the longer run, you know, you will find that the indigenous music is going to be the new amapiano in the world. You never know.
Yes.
Because it's like a raw original sound that will be coming from us. And I always say this to people, I feel like the world, especially the musical world, is looking mostly into Southern African music for new trends.
Always.
And And if us as these people who are found in these African, Southern African countries can present to the world what we have, our own thing, you know, that could flip things for our African music out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the world has always, you know, been attracted to, I don't know if it's the realness or the history or the ancientness, I don't know what to call it, but there's just this very like earthy and ancient thing, you know, that you can just hear across genres, whether it's kwaito, whether it's jazz, whether it's thandiswa, whether, you know, I think people have always been attracted to Southern African music, and I think that will continue to happen. And I think you're also right to say that if we make sure that the information and the knowledge doesn't die out, then these kids can do something really, really incredible and amazing, you know. Another thing that you were talking about, I'm so excited to hear that this project that you're talking about is happening in Soweto. I actually live in Rockville, which is not far from White City.
You should visit us.
Definitely. I'll bring my son, definitely.
Absolutely.
And the thing that like I want to comment on is that particularly in urban societies, in cities, you know, it's so easy to be removed from these things because, I mean, for me, for example, I'm second generation Sowetan. Both of my parents grew up in Soweto. So they didn't grow up with some of the stories that you were sharing earlier on about cooking by the Rondeville, sitting with your aunts and all of that. They didn't have that experience. So they couldn't pass it on to me, unfortunately. And I've had to do the work of trying to do, you know, so it's very exciting to know that there are these remnants, you know, in the city and in such congregated spaces like the city where this knowledge still permeates and it still exists, and there are still portals of knowledge like yourself, you know, who are interested and want to share. So that's very encouraging for me, and like, please keep on doing the work, and I hope those children will also share with other people and it can just spread, you know. I think on my side, just on a spiritual place, I think a lot of people are displaced, you know, particularly young people in the city. They're looking for something to connect. And I think music is a really, 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 really good way to start working through some of those feelings and to start remembering and to start learning some of the things that maybe we feel removed from. So yeah, I'm very excited about your project taking place in Soweto.
Actually, thank you. I wanted to add something to just what you said, which is something I wanted to say on the previous Zoom. You know, with Indigenous music, the one thing that we usually don't think about, which is important that it carries, is our languages, you know, because our languages are very, very important in carrying our history. There's a project that I did with Samro where we were transcribing Indigenous songs into sheet music. And then with that, we had to find the translations for these songs. There's one particular song that was recorded in Lesotho, I think. I had to speak to somebody in Switzerland who is from Lesotho, who could understand that ancient language that was being sung in that song. And they tried to translate for us. And for me, it taught me that, you know, one of the things that keeps our languages is our Indigenous music, because when they sing, they're speaking the languages that they used to speak then. I think we just got off, but I'll continue. Yeah, I think that's one of the most important things that that is embedded in Indigenous music, is the importance of the language. We get to know what were our ancestors using in terms of language, because our language now has changed a lot. But through our songs, the old traditional songs, you would find that they still words that they used in those songs that maybe we no longer use now, and we don't even know the meanings of them, you know. And I think preserving songs like that, like Indigenous songs, is one of the important things, because that is the language, like we're preserving the language as well as part of that.